We're joined now by Congressman Ro Khanna. He's going to be, and we could throw up this first element here. He's going to be talking to us about his fascinating, really forward-thinking bill that he's written with Senator Marco Rubio, which is interesting in its own right. The legislation itself is interesting, basically developing practically for the first time American industrial policy. We want to get to that in a moment. We're also going to talk about Aaron Swartz and his life and legacy. And relatedly, I wanted to start by asking you about the tragic death yesterday of Blake Hounshell, who is a New York Times reporter who you had worked with a little bit. Tell us a little bit about how you got to know Blake.
It was devastating and shocking. I mean, I had sat down with Blake actually when my book came out, and we spent an hour and a half, 2 hours talking about philosophy, talking about economics. He was someone so well-read, so thoughtful, and he had texted me in December saying, let's get together in the new year. Just totally shocking. My heart goes out to his family. He had children, and he was really one of the thinkers in journalism.
Right. Yeah. I think that's well said. He did stand apart in that way.
He did. I mean, he was at the New York Times, but he had also a little bit of an independence. He had his own newsletter. He'd do longer form pieces. It wasn't always for him about the news of the day. It was about ideas. He did this wonderful piece on Jamie Raskin during the time where Jamie lost his son. And of course, a deep irony there with the struggles that Jamie's son had, and it seems that Blake had.
Yeah, and right, his family said that he'd lost his battle with depression, lifelong battle with depression. Same with Raskin's son and other people have, and that brings us also to Aaron Swartz, who also had depressive tendencies, and I think there was a kind of there was a flattening in the wake of his suicide back in 2013 when he was facing this relentless and unforgivable to me prosecution at the hands of the U.S. Attorney and her deputy Stephen Heyman there. But it's a more complicated story than just that. But I wanted to ask you, what Aaron means to you, and to back into it, I want to say, when did you arrive out in the Silicon Valley area, and how have you seen kind of the culture around there change from the kind of pioneering openness and hostility to greed that Aaron represented?
Hostility to power.
Hostility to power and hostility to greed. Like I didn't even mention this at the top of the show, but he helped develop, when he was 13 and 14, RSS feed. Somebody like that can go out there and just print money in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And he actively fought against that. Is there some of that still in Silicon Valley, or when did you see it start to change?
Well, first of all, I appreciate your writing on Aaron, because his prosecution was totally unjustified. They went after him on a computer statue because he was basically making information public, in the public domain. Whatever you think of the law, it certainly wasn't criminal, and that was one of the causes, I think, of his taking his life. I went out there. I went out there partly because of Larry Lessig, and Larry Lessig is a great scholar on
mentor of Aaron's.
Cyber law, mentor of Aaron's. He was teaching at Stanford. I had done some research for him. He said, "Well, the place to be is Silicon Valley. It's such a interesting place in thinking about the issues of the future." And when I went out in 2001, it was still a place where you had a lot of iconoclastic people who didn't see themselves as the winners, actually. They were the folks who didn't make it in San Francisco at the banks and at the traditional firms, and they had kind of come down to Silicon Valley where there are all these immigrants and people's names you couldn't pronounce. And there's still an element of that. I mean, we think of Silicon Valley as just Apple, Google. There's still that counter culture, entrepreneurial spirit, but it's been dominated now by some of these companies that are the winners, that are no longer the upstarts. And I think they have to have much more serious reflection about what it means to have power. They're no longer the challengers of power. They are the people in power.
Well, the drip with the Twitter files, one of the early Twitter file documents showed an exchange that you had with someone at Twitter, I think he was an executive at Twitter, about the First Amendment, about free speech. And it seems that mentality, that attitude that you were trying to impress upon him, that's absolutely essential if you're running a speech platform. sort of lost on these corporate giants. Twitter has become a corporate giant, started by somebody like Jack Dorsey, who used to have more of that open source, like countercultural mentality. Where did that change? How did that change? How did we go from point A to point B, where you're the only one on the left standing up in that moment for the right position there?
You know, I think it was an overcorrection to 2016. These platforms got beaten up in 2016 saying there was foreign interference. They allowed all this hate to proliferate. And so their reaction to that was, we're going to have content moderation. And some of the content moderation, in my view, is justified for these forums. But they, in doing that, didn't really think through what all the principles should be. And content moderation shouldn't mean taking down the New York Post. It shouldn't mean not sharing an article by a journalist. So, yeah, they have the right to do that. They're not the government. But it violates the sense of open, robust debate that's the hallmark of our country.
And so turning to your legislation with Marco Rubio, so first of all, and this could be a challenge for our audience, needs a better name.
It does.
It's called.
It does.
I mean, it's straightforward. It's called the National Development Strategy and Coordination Act, but that doesn't beat the Patriot Act or the
No.
other
Just call it the Patriot Act.
Just call it the Patriot Act. Yeah, just call it the Patriot Act.
It's more patriotic.
The Patriot Act would be good.
Repeal the Patriot Act, replace it.
You used to not need clever names, right? I mean, FDR had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the War Production Board, which is partly a model. But FDR also was fighting World War II and the Great Depression. In today's day and age, you need a good name. But look, Senator Rubio has been pretty forward-thinking on this in his own party. When you have some people in the Freedom Caucus basically not wanting to spend a dime, he's saying, no, we need to actually have the government working with business, working with educational institutions to have manufacturing production here. It was a colossal mistake to allow it all to go to China. And we talked about me working with Caleb in his office. Caleb gets it. I mean, I joke around that I want an order of magnitude, probably 10x or 100x of what Senator Rubio wants to spend. But the point is, we both see the need for the government to be involved in revitalizing production in this country.
And can you take us through the guts of the bill, basically exactly what the mechanism is to invigorate this industrial policy via this piece of legislation?
So the legislation basically says we have places in this country that have been gutted. Jobs have left, factory towns have been totally shuttered, and we need massive economic development there. So we're going to create this Economic Development Council like a National Security Council. It's going to look through research at what are the places in America that need economic revitalization. What is the industry we can bring there? Not just semiconductor chips. We're talking about steel, aluminum, textiles, masks. How do we do it so it's sustainable? And how can we have the financing for government purchasing, for low interest loans, for the investment, massive investment in the engineers or the trades that we'll need, and work with the private sector to rebuild these communities. It's almost, frankly, like we saw after communism in parts of Europe. There were places that were decimated, and there was an effort at economic redevelopment. We've never tried it. We went to these places that lost factory towns, we've lost 70,000 factories in this country. And Fred Anderson in Indiana came up to me with a binder of 40 factories that had shut down in his town. And what did we say to these folks? We said, here's your unemployment check. Here's your trade adjustment assistance. Now go fend for yourself. Did we ever even try to say we're going to rebuild your communities? We're going to partner with you to have new economic development. This is the central failure of American policy over the last 40 years.
Here's your unemployment check, and here's your opioid prescription.
Yeah, the county I grew up in, Kent County, Maryland, over on the Eastern Shore, the biggest town in that county has about 5,000 people, Chestertown, and it's the main employer there is a manufacturer called Dixon Valve and Coupling. They employ something like 500 people, and in a town of 5,000, if that goes away, it just complete wreckage.
You get it, yeah.
It's just completely wiped out. So what do you do about manufacturing facilities that still exist and are under a ton of pressure? And one of the reasons it's still there is that the family that owns it just has deep roots in the community and has resisted kind of profit pressures to first go to the South, because that's the first place you go, the south of the United States, and then you go somewhere else, whether it's Central or South America or China or India or elsewhere. They've resisted that, but at some point, generations are going to pass down, and somebody's going to take over. That's going to look at the numbers and say, this doesn't make sense anymore. We love the Eastern Shore.
What do they make?
Valves and couplings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pieces for the economy, for the industrial economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, I think it's important that you focus on products like that, because we talk about, I was the author of Semiconductor, the chips manufacturing, but you can't put a semiconductor factory in every town in this country. You can't put a new battery plant in every town. We've got to talk about people making the gaskets, the textiles, the valves. How do we keep that competitive? I'd say a few things. If they're critical supplies for the country, have the government assist in some of the purchase agreements, have the government assist in the financing. But the biggest advantage we have is new technology. It's allowing for digital technology, and AI is actually making it easier to produce. It's making us more productive. And the government should be assisting in having that investment, both in the workforce and in the technology. You know who does this is Germany. I mean, Germany has 20% manufacturing workforce, and a lot of it's specialty manufacturing. So I think there are ways that we can keep a lot of these factories open, and not every factory. I don't want to mislead people, but factories that can use new technology, new processes, the government as a partner, we can do this.
Tyler Cowen, he had a really interesting post this week about how it may be unworkable, chips legislation in the United States, for example, because of the qualifications of the American workforce overall. Who do we have that's qualified enough to run a chips manufacturing place? For instance, does legislation like this need to be coupled with legislation that also brings more immigrants into the United States that have qualifications to work on these projects? Or do you think the American workforce as it is today is capable of plugging into an industrial policy like this?
We need both. I mean, we need massive investment in engineering in this country, software engineering, the trades, electricians, plumbers, and we also need some immigration. I mean, a lot of the production expertise right now is sitting in Taiwan, and it would be very hard to do without some of that immigration. But this is where I think the debate in this country is flawed, where we're putting blue-collar workers against the PhDs. I mean, you could say we need more PhDs. We should celebrate college education on math, science, engineering, and also celebrate the electricians, the plumbers, the tradespeople who we have not done enough in providing pathways for manufacturing. And it's going to take all of us to actually re-industrialize, both the 60% of folks who don't have a college degree and the advanced college graduates in science and technology.
And as you were talking about the way to save some of these manufacturing plants in the U.S., I'm thinking of the 500 employees who are working for Dixon, but it doesn't matter, name a plant around the country. Let's say you can use automation and AI. Do some of those people have to then worry that they're going to be automated out? I know that as you've traveled the country and you've written about this in your book, you've encountered lots of fears about automation. People see that, and I think in some ways it's a proxy for people's fears about the uncertainty of the future, but in some ways it's real, like that they're seeing in the grocery store and Home Depot that now that there aren't checkout people like there used to be. So is there something you're doing or trying to do that pairs the loss of jobs with a necessary expansion? Like in other words, in order to get the investment, if you're going to lay people off, you have to also then build another plant so that you're producing more, because the world needs more valves and couplings. It's not like we need to stay flat.
Well, I'd say there are two points to it. It used to be a traditional steel mill had 4,000 people. A mini mill with more production has about 1,500 people. So as you have higher productivity, as you have new technology, for a particular product, it may mean less jobs. But if you massively increase production, if you massively increase exports, then you can have more jobs with the higher productivity. And that's what we need to do. Plus, if it's higher productivity, they need to be paid more. So you're having a multiplier effect in the community. So I don't think you can be for American manufacturing being a superpower and say, we don't want technology, we don't want innovation in manufacturing processes. That's selling the country a lie. You're not going to be able to compete. But I think what we say is we can have these processes and massively expand production so that ultimately we're going to increase jobs. And again, I point to Germany, where 20% of their workforce is in manufacturing. So the automation actually hasn't displaced German workers.
Yeah, I was thinking recently about, I'm from Wisconsin, Milwaukee Tools recently got, I think, some subsidies from the government to do, to ramp up production actually in Wisconsin. I'm curious about your conversations with people in the business community. Is there increasing awareness, maybe post-COVID, that this is something that needs to be done, that there needs to be an increase in the United States? So obviously subsidies are helpful, but do you think corporate America is coming around to the necessity of some of this, or is there still, do you encounter serious resistance when you're talking to the business community?
I think the thinking is changing. Look, the corporations made out extraordinarily. They shipped our production off to China. They had labor arbitrage. They didn't have to have the environmental regulations, and they sold cheaper products to the United States. And the bargain with the United States, with Americans, was, we'll give you a cheap TV, but in the process, you're going to lose your job. And that's a bargain today that didn't work. I mean, people rather not have, in my view, just the cheap TV if it meant the loss of their factories. So I think people now in the corporate America are understanding two things. This led to massive social disunity in this country. This led to things, not a direct line, but a contributing factor to things like January 6th. I mean, it led to people being upset, being frustrated. And I think they get that. They're beginning to get that. And second, they get the risk of having supply chains overseas with the political volatility, with the pandemic. And they understand that there's a resilience argument for having it here. But we can't just trust corporate leaders to bring it back. We need policy to bring it back, which has to include, in my view, Buy American tax credits. It has to include certain strategic tariffs so that if you're polluting offshore and you're bringing it here, there's a tariff, and it has to have government investment. I don't believe this is protectionism. Protectionism is saying we don't want the global economy. I think this is smart economic policy, the kind that Hamilton had, the kind that FDR had, the kind that we need now.
And so last week, you had a lot of people on the left, watching the Freedom Caucus hold up Kevin McCarthy's speakership in order to extract concessions and saying, this is the kind of fight we want to see. Like you had plenty of people saying, wow, what a disaster, what a circus, what a mess. But then you had others saying, no, this is what an actual fight is. And if you want to throw down,
that's what democracy is.
Look at the way that they're throwing down here. Was there any part of you or any part of your colleagues in Congress who were watching this and saying, all right, I don't like what they're fighting for, but there might be something we could learn from here in the future about how we're going to fight our own party leadership?
Well, I joked with someone. I said, this is the first time I've been in Congress in 6 years, and I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, usually you go in, everyone knows what the vote's going to be. You pretend to hear the arguments. No one really is paying any attention. They're all on their phones texting. And here there was a sense of drama, right? I think that's why people were glued in. It was different than the talking points. My concern was not the drama. If there was drama at 15 votes and we ended electing people who were going to help bring American jobs back, make the proper investments, and not have frivolous investigations, I'd be fine with it. My concern was that the deals that were made to get there are exactly the opposite of what I think this country needs to be doing. I mean, they're talking about not increasing the debt ceiling for past debt that we have. They're making deals with very, very far right folks who I just philosophically disagree with. So I'm less concerned about, it took 15 votes. I'm more concerned about what McCarthy had to give up to get those votes.
Right, but as if Democrats take the House back in 2 years, which seems plausible, it'll probably be by a narrow margin. Is there any thinking going on in the Progressive Caucus now to say, what are we going to demand when that comes around?
Well, Hakeem Jeffries was warned by Kevin McCarthy, right? He said, I had a unanimous vote 2 years ago. Look, I think there are arguments for it, for example, Medicare for All, to get hearings on that, to get a vote on that. But here's the difference, and I believe the fundamental difference with the Freedom Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. The Freedom Caucus, by their own definition, just wants to blow things up and cut things. I mean, that's why they're in Congress. And I disagree with it. I'm not questioning their motives. They're in Congress because they want to reduce spending, cut government. that's an easier thing to be a no on than saying, okay, we want Medicare for all, which is what if we have to have legislation, draft it, and just say it's a harder thing to do when you have an affirmative agenda. So the progressives are never going to be blow up government or let's just hurt government. But are there lessons in terms of saying we want more progressives on certain committees, we want certain bills to come up for a vote? Sure. I mean, I think that those are things that progressives should consider.
I'm very curious to follow the single subject bill situation that you guys got going on this Congress. That'll be a fascinating experiment, I think.
Yeah, not all the rules were bad reforms. I mean, the fact that members can introduce amendments, the fact that 72 hours we have to see the bill, the single subject bill seems to me thoughtful. Some of the rules, I understand, I have to look at the details, make it easier to do war powers resolutions to stop to stop wars and make sure that those are privileged. So I think it's too broad a brush to just say everything that was done was wrong. But then you also have that with the gutting of the congressional ethics. I mean, who's for that in this country? That Congress people should have less oversight on our ethics? I mean, that probably polls less than Congress itself. I don't know who came up with that idea.
What about their so-called church committee? Would you join that if you were invited? You know, the criticism of it is that it's just going to be kind of a Hunter Biden witch hunt type of committee. On the other hand, they might stumble on all sorts of interesting
stuff.
revelations. Yeah. So where do you come down on that?
No, look, the church committee had, in my view, two big insights. One, the role that unfortunately our government played in interfering in countries overseas with self-determination, and the church committee exposed that, and I think put appropriate guardrails on these agencies. And the second thing is they discovered a lot of the surveillance of the Black Panthers and in civil rights dissidents. I just don't think this committee, I think it's going to become too politicized in going after the investigators of January 6th and other things. We'll see. I mean, I hope I'm wrong.
Would you take a seat, though?
Probably not. I'd have to have a lot of assurances that it's not going to be used for those partisan purposes.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming by here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to have to wrap here so that we can get our show out, but we have a couple more guests that are coming around. So if you're listening to this on the podcast or on the kind of main premium thing, jump back over to YouTube later.
That's right.
Once you've made it this far. But Congressman Khanna, always appreciate you coming by.
Always great. Thanks for the detailed discussion. I wish we had more of this in the media.
Yeah. Me too. All right, see you guys soon.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.